I've been sitting here listening to all this in terms of been thinking, okay, what can the legislature do? What can a state legislature do to beat back federal mismanagement on federal lands? Okay, and I think there's a very potent role for this legislature to play. You know, a couple of weeks ago, this body met a few weeks ago to talk about what to do about transfer of lands, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this body on that. And I'm not going to get into that. Let's set that aside for a second. I mean, there's either two things are going to happen. Either the federal government's going to hang on to the lands, or they're not. Okay. So we've talked about you all have vetted the first thing, and you're continuing to vet that, and I'm working with you on that. But what about the scenario what do we do in the meantime while the lands are still in federal control? The good news is that in the Federal Land Policy Management Act, which is the Organic Act for BLM, the National Forest Management Act, which is the Organic Act for the forest, NEPA, which controls management of both, and related regulations, all to one degree or another direct federal agencies to give heed and give credence and be consistent with and coordinate and work with state and local plans and state and local officials when conducting any kind of planning process or revision to a plan or plan amendment or any type of project by law and by regulation. Not saying the federal agencies always follow those laws as well as they should. In fact, I have example after example where they don't. But the legal framework is there. And the frustration that I have experienced in the 12 years I've been doing public lands is this. Oftentimes, local governments and state governments do not have enough granularity in their plans, be they local plans, be they state plans, to give a target to the federal agencies, to give local officials and state planning officials something to say, hey, federal agency, you have to bend to our plan. Oftentimes the federal say, well, I read your plan and it's got a lot of generalities, but it's silent on this specific issue. So, for the little while, and some may think it's too long a while, that the lands are still controlled by the federal government. I think it'd be I don't think it'd be done in 1 year. I think it'd be a 1, 2, maybe 3 year project. But I'd love to see the legislature commission an effort and fund an effort in conjunction with the counties to go out and plan the living heck out of this state, and to plan the living heck out of the public lands from one end of the state to the other. I mean, earlier this day, Chairman Stratton asked somebody, what would you do if you're king? Well, this would be the act of articulating what we would do if we were king. How we would, in other words, take for example, someone said 40 trees per acre, okay? Well, what this plan ought to do is go mountain range by mountain range in this state, forest stand by forest stand, and set articulated, easily understood goals in terms of forest health, in terms of number of trees, in terms of age class variability, in terms of diversity of aspen and pine, and then go down to the steps, the benches, valley by valley, talk about what the conditions should be in terms of pinyon juniper versus grasslands. Out on the range, out on the winter ranges, talk about what the forage conditions should be, talk about what the desired herd, I mean, just get down, just to get as granular as you can. And let it be a joint county-state effort. Let there be a state management plan for every county that the county could then get in lockstep, and the county could, and then we need to foster the culture where we're at every federal planning process and we're waiving those plans, and we're waiving NEPA and FLIPMA and NIFMA, and we're waiving all the laws that give us the right to have a seat at the table and compel them to be consistent with us and insist on it, and if they don't do it, take them to court. And that's, I don't know, that's not the total solution, but that's just some, I keep thinking, okay, what can the state legislature do? Well, we can leverage our right to consistency and our right to have a seat at the table. And in the meantime, try to get the lands back.
So when you say the law requires them to listen and consider, does it require them to do anything more than that? I mean, I'm sure the reason there hasn't been more of this in the past is people say, well, why waste our time? They never listen to us. And so this would be the same thing. You could be there, you could be there for a meeting.
On FLIPMA ground, okay, let me take the BLM, first of all, Senator. FLIPMA says that not only shall they listen and coordinate and work with, but it says federal plans shall be consistent with state and local plans to the maximum extent allowed by federal law. In other words, come all the way over to the county or the state and county plan as long as you're not violating some specific law. So there's that clout there. You don't find that kind of specific language on the forest side, but you do get a lot of good language in the NEPA regulations that basically require them to give in good faith as much credence as they can to state and local plans when they're developing their own. It's pretty good language. It's not as tight, Senator Jenkins, as the BLM language, but it ain't bad, and I dare say we haven't utilized it as much as we should.
Mr. Chairman, may I? So, Mark, I'm very intrigued by that idea, and I think if we were to marry that with this concept of jurisdiction, I mean, the United States Supreme Court 2 years ago said jurisdiction for health, safety, welfare, lives, liberties, properties is possessed by the states, but not the federal government. Well, that has to mean something. It makes sense. I mean, when Commissioner Topham was describing what he was describing, I keep thinking, how in the world is it that you as county commissioners, we as state representatives, have to sit by knowing that that forest is going to burn and it's going to destroy your watershed and your community's going to die and you're going to export your kids and you're going to have silt coming down, you're going to destroy fisheries and kill animals, and our job is to protect health, safety, welfare, and we're supposed to just sit by and wait for the next spark. I can't imagine that the law countenances that kind of a result. So I wonder, and I really am intrigued by the idea, I wonder then if we marry this idea of those plans with the concept of we have to define and understand what that jurisdiction is that the Supreme Court said is possessed by the states and not the federal government. So like Commissioner Clayson said a year and a half ago at your meeting in Provo, our first question needs to be at the door, excuse me, you need to tell us what your authority is before you just come in here and start making plans and going and moving forward on things that negatively impact health, safety, and welfare of our people. So I'm intrigued by that. I'd like to work with you on that. I think the opportunity then is to put our federal partners in the position of saying, no, we're going to sue you to keep you from protecting the animals, from protecting the air, from protecting the water, from protecting the livelihoods of our people, and put them in that position, and maybe we can figure out a way to use EJA to our benefit. But I'm very intrigued and want to work with you on that.
Representative Ivory, I see two benefits coming out of this kind of planning. The first one I've already described, the giving us more clout at the federal planning and the federal plan amendment and EIS table. The other one deals directly with the transfer of public lands. Why? Because part of the narrative, part of the conversation is, well, what's the state going to do with these lands if they're handed over? Well, so it's like going to the moon. All those benefits that came out of the moon, going to the moon, all this technology we used, they had nothing to do with going to the moon. Well, these plans, all of a sudden, you've got something to show the world that this is how we manage the lands if we had the lands. So it has a dual benefit. So regardless of what direction fate in the future is going to take us on this whole transfer lands issue, we benefit either way. The lands either stay with the feds, in which case this kind of plans help us and give us clout, or they don't, in which case we make the case, as we're making it both judicially and politically, that, hey, we do have a plan. It will make a difference. It will do a better job. It will make a more sound environmental condition, and it will bring in some money in the boot. So yeah, I see this effort as benefiting us either way we go. Either way we go.
Mr. Chair. Mark, I've been around a little while, and I want to know, I've heard of a lot of initiatives, and I like the sound of what you're saying. What I want to know is what's it going to cost? If we're going to be partnering with the counties, obviously the counties are stressed because of built and everything else, it's not dependable. But if we're going to do this as a partner with the counties, we probably will have to foot most of the bill. I don't have any problem with that. I just want an answer from you, but not tonight maybe. What will this initiative cost if we decide to go this direction so we can plan?
That's a fair question. It's a proper question, and it's one we ought to try to get an answer to, Representative Brown.
It makes you wonder, do we have the right to this access to justice rule? I mean,
You have
that pays for others, does it pay for states and counties to participate?
an entity that may sue and recover attorney's fees if successful against the federal government. I think that's your question. What kind of entity must that entity be to qualify under EJA? I can give you a specific answer. It has to be an entity that both has under $7 million in assets and employs fewer than 500 people in order to take advantage of that. The policy is like it's supposed to help the little guy, you know. So there are efforts. I won't get into too much detail. People behind me know more detail than I'll divulge at this point, but there are efforts to create such entities to help this cause on the other side of the ideological spectrum. But state obviously doesn't qualify, and most counties don't. Does that answer your question, Senator? I don't know. Thanks.
Mark, how do these large environmental groups fit underneath that 7 million?
I didn't hear the question. All I heard was Mark.
How do large environmental groups fit underneath that 7 million?
Well, they just split like amoeba. If they get too big, they just divide.
Mark, 501c3 has an exemption under EJA.
They still have to meet the threshold, the asset and.
I was just reading some research just a couple of minutes ago that in the Fifth Circuit Court,